college football podcast for everyone and everyone else. I'm your host tonight, Cody Williams, not joined by my colleague and co-host John Bueller tonight. Hope he's doing well. Seems like he had a good time with the Arizona State podcast. And what a week 12 we just witnessed, because the college football playoff picture, the way we feel about certain programs and certain teams has definitely changed just based off today's results. And so we're going to go with a little 3 yards and a cloud of punt without Bueller to, be tangential with, which I am probably the worst of the two of us to be able to do. I'm just going to get right into it. And so I'm going to run first down, and I'm running with Georgia. And I think Georgia can still win a national championship. We spent the entire week exhausting a lot of energy, a lot of oxygen on the idea of, well, can a three-loss Georgia team get into the playoff? Georgia's left out of the 12-team bracket from the rankings we saw on Tuesday night because Boise State is a bid stealer now based on where they were ranked in the college football playoff rankings. And Georgia rendered all those talking points moot tonight in Athens because there's two things that stood out to me from this game, and two reasons why I'm a lot higher on Georgia than I was just a week ago, because we saw a week ago Ole Miss really dominate in the trenches, which is kind of what stood out to me. Like, it wasn't just that this Ole Miss defensive front, which might be the best in the country, so I'm not going to fault Georgia's offensive line, which is banged up, too much for getting, worked a little bit by the Ole Miss defensive front. But Tennessee's defensive front is no joke either. And after the first quarter of play, Georgia held up really well. More importantly, though, Carson Beck held up really well. I'm not saying Carson Beck deserves to be 1P1 in the 2025 NFL draft now. Like, there's still some warts and some stuff that needs to be ironed out moving forward. There's no doubt about that. But we saw the Carson Beck that we were expecting to see for most of the season on Saturday night. We saw him delivering strikes, delivering throws, being decisive, being being in control of the offense. And frankly, you know what? I'm still not going to say that Mike Bobo is a good offensive coordinator, an offensive coordinator that I'd want coaching my offense. But when push came to shove on Saturday night against Tennessee, Mike Bobo put the game in Carson Beck's hands, and Carson Beck delivered. And we hadn't seen him do that in more than a month, quite frankly. And so if Carson Beck has gotten past some of the, I don't know if they were demons. I don't know if it was a mental block. I don't know what it was. I'm not in the Georgia locker room. I'm not in Carson Beck's head. I don't know. But if he got past some of those mental blocks or whatever was holding him back and causing him to really regress as a decision maker, then Georgia can absolutely win a national championship. I mean, this team is not unbeatable. We've seen them be beaten twice already. They still lack a true difference maker, I would say, on the outside. Although if Oscar Delp plays like he did tonight, maybe that's the difference maker. Maybe he, slips into somewhat of a lesser version of that Brock Bowers role that we saw a year ago, which Carson Beck relied on pretty heavily. Maybe that's what they do. But if Beck isn't turning the ball over, if Beck is making smart decisions, if Beck is operating the offense at the level he was on Saturday night, then this Georgia team is good enough. And the other reason why I'm saying that is because this defense really put the clamps on Tennessee. Now, I will push back on my own point with that by saying Tennessee jumped out to a 10-0 lead. When the offense was scripted, it looked good, and it was kind of knifing through what this Georgia defense was trying to do. But then it looked like what we've seen in the Josh Heupel versus Kirby Smart era, where the Georgia defense has won that battle time and again. Tennessee jumped out to a 10-0 lead, and Georgia won the game 31-7 from that point on, 31-17 final. The under hit, as I said it would. Love to see it. But I do think that the fact that this Georgia defense, there have been matchups that have been, frankly, more advantageous for Georgia than this one. Even if they have figured out this Tennessee veer and shoot under Josh Heupel, I still think that there have been games and matchups where this Georgia defense had the talent to absolutely match up well and shut down opposing offenses, and they didn't. The fact that they were able to come out and do it tonight shows me a lot. And like, I think that the other thing that I was really thinking about when it comes to this Georgia team is the idea that there were a lot of people who, when they looked at Georgia, and we were having those can a three loss Georgia get into the playoff conversations this week before Georgia had even lost their third game, it was all it was all a bit confusing because you look back at that Texas game, and I'm not saying Texas is a perfect team. They're not, for sure. We saw that today against Arkansas. But I think that when you really start to unpack that a little bit more, how dominant Georgia was in that game, like it was 30 to 15, but it wasn't that close. Tennessee, or excuse me, Texas late in that game, made the margin look a bit more respectable than the eye test said it was for much of that game. I mean, hell, Sark had to switch to Arch Manning mid-game, and that didn't, I mean, it wasn't an effective switch, and they went back to Quinn Ewers after halftime, but like that's how dominant Georgia was in that game against one of the better offensive lines in the country, particularly those two tackles who are going to be NFL draft picks, high-end NFL draft picks. We saw what the ceiling of this Georgia defense was in that game, but we hadn't really seen it since. And I think in the second half, particularly when they blanked Tennessee tonight, we saw the ceiling of that Georgia defense again. So I'm not saying Georgia is going to win a national championship. I think that the big takeaway for me overall is that Georgia is much more akin to Alabama in terms of being high variance from what I've seen. Like we've seen the best of Georgia and we've seen the best of Alabama, and the best of both of those teams is good enough to win a national championship. It's just whether or not we get that in the college football playoff, which is going to be interesting, especially because Georgia does not control its own destiny right now in terms of the SEC and potentially getting a top four seed. Right now, as the things currently stand, with the Tennessee loss, if Alabama wins out against Oklahoma I believe Oklahoma is on the road in Norman. They went out at Oklahoma and then at Holton for the Iron Bowl. They are going to be playing the winner of Texas A&M essentially for the SEC championship game, or in the SEC championship game, excuse me. But if Alabama has one of those days where the variance doesn't go their way of what this team is, who knows? That can put Georgia in. An Alabama loss would put Georgia in the SEC championship game, and we've already seen them dominate Texas once. Can they do it again? I don't know. Maybe we don't get that same thing. But it does feel like Georgia has comfortably put itself in position to where it is going to be in the college football playoff, barring something unforeseen over the final 2 weeks of the regular season. And speaking of teams that we need to take seriously, gonna run again because it's second down. Um, I think Colorado might be the team that nobody in the country wants to play right now. And this isn't just me gassing up or getting caught up in the heat of Coach Prime. Utah is coming off an emotional loss in Holy War last week. I understand that. But when you look at and Utah is worse than they were a year ago, there's no doubt about that. But at the same time, when you look back at last year, I do not have the result in front of me. Let me find it real quick. Utah, Colorado, 2023. 23-17 Utah. They uglied the game up, and the Colorado offense just really didn't have a whole lot of answers up front. And early in this game, which was a 10 a.m. local kick in Boulder, brutal stuff. I mean, I was working at 10 a.m. local time in the same time zone, but at the same time, like I wasn't playing football. But Colorado came out and pretty much dominated the action after like about the first quarter when Utah was getting a push, when Utah was kind of doing what they did last year and really controlling the trenches of the game. Colorado adjusted. They started really pressuring Isaac Wilson and forcing a, frankly, not that good quarterback into a lot of mistakes. The defense took advantage of it, and Shador Sanders and this offense absolutely took off. Travis Hunter's the Heisman Trophy winner, and he's a matchup problem on either side of the ball that he's playing, no doubt about that. You throw his way. He did allow his first touchdown of the year today to Dorian Singer, though, which I would say has more to do with him than Isaac Wilson. I think the thing that stands out to me is yes, you have Shador. Yes, you have Travis Hunter, and those are two of the best players in college football. I don't think there's anyone who can, not being a hater, debate that logically at this point. But when you start to break it down, this Colorado team is exponentially better than they were a year ago because of what we've seen on the defensive side of the ball and in both trenches. This defensive front is getting after the quarterback. They have been, it wasn't just the Utah game, they've been doing it for the past month. And seeing them be able to do that in this game, pretty damn impressive. Especially after it wasn't really happening early in that game when Utah was hanging around and keeping it close. And then the fact that the offensive line did a really good job of not just protecting Shedeur Sanders, but opening up some holes in the run game, making some stuff happen there. Like Colorado's lack of a run game has been because their offensive line wasn't performing. Now that it's performing, I'm not saying it's a great run game, don't get me wrong. Their run blocking is still far worse than their pass blocking. But this offensive line is making it to where they're not just completely one-dimensional. You can just drop eight and know that they're going to throw the ball. They won't even run in a three-man box. And when you look at the rest of the Big 12, like currently have BYU, Kansas on the screen here, I'm not sure any of these teams are playing as well as Colorado right now. And I think it's actually beneficial for Colorado that they're not in a position like BYU, where you haven't lost a game. You're feeling pressure that, frankly, the program's never felt before. Not only is this their second year in a conference after being an independent for so long, but this isn't a team that we've seen go 10 and 0, 11 and 0, 12 and 0. Like that's pressure that BYU as a program has just never felt before. Particularly, and I mean, obviously the players haven't felt that before either. So like Colorado already has that loss, those losses, their losses out of the way. Granted, the Nebraska loss does look worse, so like I think an at-large bid is probably out of the question. But if you put BYU and Colorado in the same field right now, I'm not sure. I think Colorado is probably favored in that game, and that could be for the Big 12 berth in the college football playoff as a conference champion. I also want to run with another team that I don't think anyone wants to play right now. That's Tulane Green Wave. We've talked a lot about Boise State, just kind of almost as like a formality that they're going to be in the college football playoff as the group of five champion. Tulane's going to have something to say about that. And I understand Army's undefeated and Army is in this conversation as well. But you look at what this Tulane team has done. Their two losses this season are to Kansas State and Oklahoma. They have not lost to a group of five team. Their two losses are to Power Five opponents. And granted, it's two Power Five opponents that I don't believe in, quite frankly. But they didn't get blown out by either of them. They played both of them pretty damn close. And I also think this Tulane team has gotten a lot better. Now, again, I'm not saying that Tulane is flawless. This defense, I think, hasn't been tested in a minute. So I will be curious to see what they do, especially, the AAC championship game is now set already. It's going to be Tulane versus Army. I will be interested to see what Army can do in that game. And let's be clear about this. If Army beats Notre Dame this upcoming week, moves to 10 and 0 on the season, Army has a chance to jump Boise State in the rankings and really have like the driver's seat to get in as the G5 champion. But the way Tulane is playing right now, with how high octane their offense is and with what they just did to Navy, granted, Navy lost Blake Horvath, their quarterback, early in this game. And we've seen with Army even what the difference, what the drop off is when these service academies lose their starting quarterback because it's someone who just knows how to run the offense and knows how to run it to its peak effectiveness. And I think we did see a bit of that with Navy, but 35 to nothing is 35 to nothing. Tulane went out there and poured it on them. And so I don't think anyone wants to play Tulane. And I think we need to make sure we're keeping a bit more of an eye on the Green Wave than we probably were coming into the past couple weeks because they're not just in the AAC championship game. They're very much live to be the G5 champion, especially when you look at a Boise State team that, yes, ended up running away from San Jose State tonight. They were down 14 nothing. Probably should have been down at least 17 nothing, if not 21 nothing. Were able to get the ball back when San Jose State had it in the red zone. But this Boise State team still has to win the Mountain West to get that G5 spot. If they don't, we're probably looking at the winner of Tulane and Army as that G5 champion. And right now, if I'm Army, not sure I want to play Tulane because this Tulane team looks like it's pretty damn legit. Unlike where I'm passing, which is Bronco and the LSU Tigers. I had LSU on upset alert going to Gainesville, going to the swamp against Florida. I thought that the effort we saw Florida put in last week against Texas had a lot to do with the hangover that Florida was feeling from the cocktail party. No pun intended there. But It just felt like they were licking their wounds a little bit. Still had Warner at quarterback, the kid from Yale. Get DJ Lagway back for this game. Plays awesome. Was clearly, he said, probably wasn't 100%. I think Billy Napier said after the game he wasn't 100%. Gutted through it and really elevated this offense. But more importantly, the Florida defense showed up. Really put Garrett Nussmeier in a lot of uncomfortable positions. Tested an offensive line that was supposed to be one of the best in the country. I don't think they performed like one, frankly, but and that's not just this game. I don't think they performed like one through much of the season. But they came out and they were able to get it done. And now Brian Kelly's streak of 10 win seasons is coming to a close. They're a four-loss team that even if they go to a bowl game, there's no way that they can win 10 games this season. And frankly, I'm passing on Brian Kelly as LSU's head coach. If I was LSU, I think you would have to seriously consider firing him. Now, to be clear, Brian Kelly's not getting fired. This isn't talking about the buyout. The buyout is massive. I believe it's in the $60 million range. I'm not sure what the exact figure is, but it's a lot of money. LSU can find the money. Texas A&M found the money. LSU can find the money. Texas A&M with Jimbo Fisher, of course. But I do think that when you get down to it, he's not going to be fired because Bryce Underwood wants to go play for Brian Kelly. And if you're not aware who Bryce Underwood is, he's the number one quarterback in the 2025 recruiting cycle. Reportedly just turned down a $10.5 million NIL offer from Michigan because he wants to go play at LSU so badly. And I'm sure he's going to be well compensated to do so, to be very clear. And everything I've seen, everything I've heard about Bryce Underwood, to quote Bud Elliott of CBS Sports and 24/7 Sports, he's the closest thing we've seen as a recruit to Cam Newton. And Cam Newton went to Auburn when he finally, when after he left Florida, he went to Auburn and he basically put the Tigers on his back and won a national championship. We're talking about that type of player. So if LSU doesn't want to lose Bryce Underwood, they're going to keep Brian Kelly. I venture to guess they don't want to lose Bryce Underwood, so they're going to keep Brian Kelly. But Bueller and I have talked pretty frequently about the shortcomings that LSU has shown in the Brian Kelly era to this point. And the big thing that stands out to me is the lack of it's not recruiting. He's still recruiting at a high level. Again, the Bryce Underwood point stands to that. It's the lack of attention to detail, I think, is how I would probably frame it. He made excuses in the preseason about LSU not really hitting the portal to go beef up in the trenches on the defensive front. That's been a problem for this LSU defense all year. They're better in the secondary than they were a year ago, but they're still not LSU. Defensive backs in Louisiana grow on trees, just like receivers. Cut from the same cloth, quite frankly. And there's a reason that LSU was DBU for as long as it was. The fact that it's not right now is an indictment on Brian Kelly. That is a Brian Kelly problem because he is not prioritizing that in the right ways, whether that's the transfer portal, whether that's in recruiting. He is not prioritizing frankly, that side of the ball. He's prioritized the offense. The offense is still good. They weren't today, but they're normally pretty good. They have been most of the season. But you're not prioritizing the defense, and it's consistently hamstringing you. You had Jaden Daniels, who won a Heisman Trophy because he was so damn good last year on offense. And you were a 9-3 team. You ended up winning your bowl game, getting that 10-win streak that's now ended, keeping that alive through last year. But when you have the Heisman Trophy winner at quarterback, 10-3 is not good enough. Especially if you follow it up the next year with the same issues that we saw the year before. The defense is killing the offense. And then the offense is taking a step back. We knew that was going to happen. You're losing Jaden Daniels. You're going to take a step back on offense when you lose a player of that caliber. You would hope that bringing in Blake Baker, you would hope that another offseason to help address the defense, that this would all hopefully, even itself out and maybe better. You're a more balanced team. Nope. Worse offense, about the same level of defense. It's tough. I do think this LSU defense is a little better, but not nearly. The improvements that needed to be made have not been made. And that's really frustrating to see from a coach in Brian Kelly who has had a lot of success in the college football world. I don't think Brian Kelly is a bad coach. I do wonder if he's a bad fit for LSU. Because when he came over from Notre Dame, the entire conversation was, okay, we saw what he did at Notre Dame recruiting wise. We saw the success he had with the Fighting Irish. And now you give him LSU's resources. You give him LSU's geographic location. You give him the lack of academic restrictions that are present at Notre Dame. He should just gangbusters hit this. And especially when you look at this season, year three for Brian Kelly has typically been the pop year. Bueller's mentioned that many times. And it's true. You look back at his history. Year three is when Brian Kelly's teams make the leap. And instead, they're pulling back a little bit this year. Maybe it's just a delayed timeline. Maybe you get Bryce Underwood in the building and everything changes. Entirely possible given the type of recruit that he is. But if it doesn't work out and you can find a way to get rid of Brian Kelly and keep Bryce Underwood after he's been in the program for a year, you have to do it because at a certain point, LSU is too proud of a program, too quality of a program, and too high of a ceiling program to settle for the lackluster results that Brian Kelly is currently delivering. And they are lackluster. I think everyone in the state of Louisiana would probably agree with me on that. Pretty pissed off this evening. And they should be. Because Brian Kelly is, I don't want to say he's a snake oil salesman, but he's not delivering on the promise that LSU thought they were getting when Brian Kelly was hired by the Tigers. And now I'm going to punt. And I'm going to be, and this is probably going to ruffle some feathers. This is probably not going to go over the best. I don't care. What I saw from Oregon and Ohio State today makes me truly question whether or not a Big Ten team can win a national championship. I think that when you look at these SEC contenders, when you look at Georgia, when you look at Alabama, and I don't want to sound SEC biased, but when you look at all of these teams, they're going to come into the playoff unbelievably battle tested. Honestly, that's one of the biggest concerns that people have about Texas is that they are not as battle tested. The one huge high profile battle that they've been in was the Georgia game, got their skulls caved in. Now, they can't control the fact that Oklahoma is, crap in the bed and that Michigan couldn't find a quarterback. But the fact of the matter is they have not played that many good teams, particularly as many as Georgia, Alabama, Ole Miss. All the schedules in the SEC have been daunting, to say the least, for the teams that are in line to make the college football playoff outside of Texas. Then you look at an Oregon team going on the road. Now, I will admit, Camp Randall is a hell of a tough place to play. And I don't know if they were playing with their food. I don't know. I don't know what to diagnose it as. I know the defense played well. The defense held Wisconsin to 13 points, came up big in the clutch. You forced a four down turnover on downs. Wisconsin got the ball back and pretty much immediately threw a pick that sealed the game and the 3-point win for Oregon. But you only scored 16 points. You averaged, I believe, under 4 yards per carry. Sack adjusted just barely over 4 yards carry. Dylan Gabriel didn't throw a touchdown pass, threw a pick. The offense just looked anemic. And this isn't a Wisconsin defense that, if you're talking about a national championship contender, that should make you look anemic. I know Oregon's ceiling is high. I know to some degree that they can win a national championship. But I'm punting on this because I'm way less confident in that after seeing what I saw today than I was the week before. And on the Ohio State side of things, congratulations, you beat Northwestern 31-7. You should beat Northwestern by 50. You were down 7-0 in this game. Early in the second quarter, you were down 7-0. You couldn't score in them early. I continue to worry about Will Howard in big games. And that's not just because of the slide against Oregon. Like, yes, that's good for the memes, it's good for the jokes. But I look at this and I don't know if Ohio State has the extra gear that we've seen Ohio State teams in previous years have. And I think that's a Will Howard thing. To be clear, talent-wise, Ohio State can win a national championship. When you have Quinshaw Junkins, whose name I've, after listening to myself say it 100 times, I know I butcher, or it doesn't sound right when I say it. That's okay. But when you have Judkins and you have Travion Henderson in the backfield, you have Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Egbuka, Carnell Tate, all these dudes. Yeah, you can explode at any moment. But I think Will Howard holds them back. He's just not the next level passer that, and I'm not saying he's not even an upgrade over Kyle McCord because he probably is. Kyle McCord's been erratic at Syracuse, to say the least. Shouts to Fran Brown, though. He gets the shower tonight. Syracuse got to win. Happy for him. Being clean's great. But in the terms of Will Howard, like, when have you ever watched him throw the ball and not thought, if we had an A minus at quarterback at Ohio State, that this team would just be blowing everyone out by 60, that they would have won the Oregon game? Because I can't escape that thought. And as you look at these SEC teams that are going to be more battle tested, man, it's just really hard to imagine Will Howard playing enough good games to get through the college football playoff to do that, especially if they don't win the Big Ten and they're having to play 4 games to do it. That's a, for me, that's a tough sell. I'm not, again, I'm not trying to show SEC bias. I'm not trying to belittle the Big Ten. I just think that these Big Ten teams have a slightly less rigorous schedule than a lot of these teams in the SEC do because I can't remember who brought this up. It was on a podcast I was listening to yesterday. But the fact that the Big Ten has 18 teams and the SEC has 16 has benefited the Big Ten. It's benefited Indiana. That's why Indiana's schedule has been so soft, and that's why they have to prove themselves against Ohio State next week. But it also, you look at it, and Ohio State and Oregon can ostensibly out talent every team that they face in the Big Ten. They can out talent a lot of teams, but they can out talent these teams in the Big Ten to the point of, like, the middle class of the Big Ten. They can out talent them to the point of, even when Oregon plays some of their worst football I've seen this year, which they did tonight, they still can find a way to win. My dog's got an itch if you can hear those bells ringing. It's his collar. I apologize. But it's hard for me to get there right now with these Big Ten teams. Again, I'm punting on this. I'm not completely passing on it. That means that it's just something I'm a little more dubious of. I'm not going to give final judgment on. But it's something I'm thinking about, something I'm tossing around in the old noggin. What I'm tossing around in the old noggin is that we'll see what happens. We'll go with that. And with that, it's 3 yards in a cloud of punt. Please like, comment, subscribe. If you subscribe here on the YouTube channel, we will give you a shout out. And please comment and let us know if you have your subscribers on private because we can't see everybody. Even if you have your subscribers on private, we can't see it either. So let us know. We'll give you a shout out. Say, hey, what's up? Appreciate you. Please like us on Apple, Spotify, anywhere podcasts are found. Apple, that 5-star review. We need it. We love it. We want it. All the things. You can follow me on Twitter at TheSizzle20. You can follow Bueller and his lovely self at Bueller118. You can follow the show. That's the show. You can follow the show at CFB False Start. We'll be back on Monday. I'll have Bueller back. We'll be able to break it down together. Probably unpack some of these things a little bit more. Unpack what we think the college football playoff bracket's going to look like after this, after, Georgia taking down Tennessee, after potentially what happens in this BYU game. I'm sure we'll react to that as well. But we'll see you then. And this is False Start.